In a country known for its safety and serenity, a chilling discovery behind a modest apartment door shattered the illusion. What began as the quiet disappearance of a troubled young woman would soon unravel into one of Japan's most horrifying crime stories. 9 lives lost, lured by promises whispered through social media. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a mirror held up to the darkest corners of modern loneliness. In the autumn of 2017, as crimson maple leaves fell across Japan's peaceful landscapes, a different kind of darkness was descending upon the nation. A series of disturbing disappearances had begun sending shockwaves through communities known for their extraordinary safety and social harmony. The vanishings seemed disconnected at first, young people simply gone without explanation, until investigators would uncover a truth more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Among these disappearances, one would ultimately crack open the case. 23-year-old Tamura Aiko from the quiet town of Hakoi had struggled with mental health issues since losing her mother to cancer 3 years earlier. The loss had devastated the young woman, triggering schizophrenia that led to a brief hospitalization. Though she had returned home, the darkness never fully lifted from her life. Her father and brother watched helplessly as she withdrew further into herself, finding solace only in the glow of her smartphone screen and the strangers she met online. Then, on a crisp October morning, Aiko's bed was found empty. No explanation. Just the lingering scent of her perfume and a half-finished cup of tea on her nightstand. Her phone was gone, her only connection to a world she increasingly found impossible to navigate in person. "My sister would never leave without telling someone," insisted her brother, Tamura Kenji, who immediately sensed something deeply wrong about her disappearance. While their father contacted local authorities, Kenji took matters into his own hands. A tech-savvy university student, he knew the answer to his sister's disappearance might lie in the digital realm she had increasingly inhabited. After gaining access to Aiko's social media accounts, what Kenji discovered chilled him to the bone. His sister had been exchanging messages with someone who shared her darkest thoughts. Together, they had been discussing ending their lives, a suicide pact that promised neither would have to die alone. The most disturbing message mentioned meeting this stranger in Tokyo. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., the message read, "You won't have to face the pain anymore. We'll find peace together." "I printed everything and took it straight to the police," Kenji would later tell reporters, his voice breaking. "I knew then that someone had manipulated my sister's vulnerability. This wasn't just about finding Aiko anymore, it was about stopping whoever had lured her away." The revelation transformed a missing person case into something far more urgent. Police immediately began tracking Aiko's digital footprint, reviewing security camera footage from train stations between Hakoi and Tokyo. Their diligence paid off when they discovered footage of Aiko walking alongside a young man at Sagamihara Station. The timestamp matched her final text message to the mysterious online contact. As investigators worked to identify the man, something extraordinary happened. A young woman contacted authorities claiming she, too, had arranged to meet someone who had promised to join her in suicide. She had gotten cold feet at the last minute, a hesitation that likely saved her life. Her description of the online persona matched exactly what they had discovered in Aiko's communications. In a move reminiscent of the most sophisticated sting operations, police coordinated with the young woman to continue her conversations with the suspect. An undercover female officer would take her place at the meeting. The trap was set. On October 31st, Halloween, a day when many cultures believe the veil between the living and dead grows thin, officers followed their suspect from a meeting point to a nondescript apartment building in Zama, a quiet residential area southwest of Tokyo. The 2-story structure looked utterly ordinary, blending perfectly into the neighborhood landscape. Nothing about its exterior suggested the nightmares contained within. As officers approached the dwelling, the first sign something was terribly wrong came in the form of an overwhelming stench that seeped from beneath the door. Through the window, they spotted what appeared to be Tamura Aiko's bag, the distinctive pink backpack her family had described, sitting casually on a table inside. What followed would haunt even the most seasoned investigators for years to come. Inside the seemingly ordinary apartment, officers discovered a chamber of horrors that defied comprehension. Coolers and storage boxes methodically organized around the small space contained dismembered human remains. A refrigerator meant for food instead preserved severed heads. In total, 9 human heads and 240 bone fragments were recovered from the scene. In my 30 years of law enforcement, I have never witnessed such methodical depravity, the lead investigator would later testify, his voice barely audible in the hushed courtroom. DNA testing would eventually identify all 9 victims, 8 women and 1 man, ranging in age from 15 to 26. The common thread binding them together wasn't just their tragic end, but their vulnerable mental state before disappearing. Most had documented histories of depression, anxiety, or suicidal ideation. Most had been active in online forums dedicated to suicide discussions. Most had believed they were meeting someone who truly understood their pain. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. A nation that prided itself on safety and social cohesion struggled to process how such horrors could unfold in their midst. Parents examined their children's online activities with new vigilance. Schools held emergency assemblies addressing internet safety. Mental health support organizations were flooded with calls from concerned families. Behind this wave of terror stood a shockingly unremarkable figure. Takahiro Shiraishi, 27 years old, unemployed, and living alone in the apartment that had become both killing ground and makeshift tomb. There was nothing in his appearance that suggested the monster within, average height, soft-spoken, with the kind of face that disappears in a crowd. Shiraishi's early life offered few obvious clues to his eventual descent into depravity. Born into a middle-class family in Zama, his childhood home revealed little outward indication of dysfunction. His father worked as a company employee while his mother maintained their household. Former classmates described him as quiet but not particularly strange, just another face in the crowded hallways of Japanese school life. Yet beneath this conventional exterior, something had gone terribly wrong. Shiraishi grew increasingly isolated during his teen years, his academic performance deteriorating until he eventually dropped out of school entirely. What followed was years of directionless drifting through a series of irregular jobs, never staying long enough to build relationships or stability. His first documented brush with criminality came when he found work as a scout for Tokyo's notorious red light districts in Kabukicho. His job involved identifying vulnerable young women and recruiting them for hostess clubs and the sex industry, an occupation that gave him a dangerous education in manipulation and exploitation. This predatory behavior caught up with him in early 2017 when he was arrested for facilitating prostitution, a crime that earned him only probation. Rather than serving as a wake-up call, this brush with the law merely pushed Shiraishi toward more efficient and deadly methods of predation. He had learned that vulnerability could be weaponized, a lesson he would soon apply with horrifying precision. The internet provided Shiraishi with perfect hunting grounds. In a country with one of the world's highest suicide rates, Japanese social media had become a gathering place for those contemplating ending their lives. Desperate, isolated individuals sought connection in their darkest moments, finding communities where they could express feelings too painful to share with family or friends. Shiraishi created multiple Twitter accounts specifically designed to target these vulnerable users. Each digital persona played a distinct role in his deadly strategy. His public accounts featured compassionate messages offering understanding and support to those expressing suicidal thoughts. "I want to help people who are really in pain," one profile claimed. "Let's die together," promised another. Once he identified potential victims, Shiraishi would initiate private communications. Here, his manipulation became more sophisticated. He positioned himself as someone who truly understood their pain because he too wished to die. He offered suicide pacts, promises they wouldn't have to die alone. For those hesitant about ending their lives in their family homes, he offered his apartment as a private location where they could find peace together. "You don't have to suffer anymore," he would write. "I know exactly how you feel." These weren't just words. They were carefully crafted lures designed to exploit the psychological vulnerability of people in crisis. In Japan's culture of stoicism, where mental health struggles often remain unspoken, Shiraishi's apparent understanding seemed like a lifeline to many. Behind each username that fell into Shiraishi's digital web was a real person with hopes, dreams, and pain. Mizuki Mura was just 20 years old when she encountered Shiraishi online. Having endured years of bullying throughout school, she struggled with depression and isolation. When she expressed suicidal thoughts online, Shiraishi was quick to offer understanding and companionship. She trusted him enough to visit his apartment, a fatal decision that ended her young life. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the story of Hanjo Isara, just 15 years old when she fell into Shiraishi's trap. A schoolgirl fleeing domestic stress, she sought escape from what she perceived as an unbearable home situation. Too young to see through the predator's manipulation, she became another victim whose remains would later be discovered in Shiraishi's apartment. Then there was Togo Nishaki, a young man with autism who initially contacted Shiraishi during a suicidal crisis. What makes his case particularly tragic is that after their initial conversations, Togo had experienced a change of heart. He no longer wanted to die, but by then he knew too much about Shiraishi's activities. To protect his deadly secret, Shiraishi killed him anyway, silencing the young man just as he had found reasons to live. Saraki Hanako, a university student buckling under the weight of family expectations and academic pressure, sought understanding in online forums when she felt she couldn't meet the standards set for her. And Hitomi Fujima, a divorced single mother struggling with the emotional aftermath of a failed relationship and the challenges of raising a child alone, both found themselves drawn into Shiraishi's lethal orbit. Each victim represented a life full of potential cut short by a predator who recognized and exploited their vulnerabilities at their most desperate moments. Their stories serve as haunting reminders of how isolation and despair can make anyone susceptible to manipulation. Once Shiraishi had lured his victims to his apartment in Zama, the horror of his intentions became clear. The small one-bedroom apartment became both killing ground and makeshift tomb. His methods were calculated and brutal. He would offer his victims sleeping pills, claiming they would make death painless. Once they were unconscious, he would strangle them with ropes. What followed revealed the truly disturbing nature of his crimes. Using store-bought saws and knives, Shiraishi methodically dismembered his victims' bodies. To conceal the smell of decomposition from neighbors, he employed a ghastly array of techniques. He covered remains with cat litter and salt to absorb odors. In some cases, investigators later discovered evidence suggesting he had attempted to cook portions of remains to further mask the smell. The killer even constructed a crude ventilation system in his apartment to help disperse odors. Despite these efforts, neighbors eventually began noticing strange smells coming from the unit, though none could have imagined the true horror behind those walls. One neighbor would later recall, "There was always something unusual about the smell, but in crowded apartment buildings, you learn not to ask too many questions. I never imagined what was really happening just a wall away from where my children slept." Shiraishi's capture came in October 2017, following the sting operation that began with Tamura Aiko's disappearance. When officers arrested him at his apartment, Shiraishi reportedly showed little emotion. "I knew this day would come," he allegedly told officers as they placed him in handcuffs. The methodical organization of human remains in his apartment spoke to the calculated nature of Shiraishi's crimes. The public trial that began in September 2020 riveted Japan and captured international attention. Prosecutors painted a picture of a calculating killer who had cynically exploited his victims' vulnerabilities. Shiraishi's defense strategy proved equally disturbing. While admitting to the killings, he claimed he hadn't tricked his victims since they had come to him wanting to die. "It was easier for me to convince people with suicidal thoughts to come to my place," he testified coldly. Yet, this narrative fell apart under scrutiny. Evidence showed that several victims, like Togo Nishaki, had expressed desire to live before their deaths. Others had been murdered while unconscious, never having agreed to the actual taking of their lives. Perhaps most revealing was Shiraishi's admission that his true motivation wasn't compassion, but a desire for sexual assault and theft of his victims' money. "I had no intention of helping them die," he eventually admitted during cross-examination. "I wanted to satisfy my own desires." On December 15, 2020, the Tokyo District Court delivered its verdict: death by hanging. In a system where judges are typically reluctant to impose capital punishment, the severity of Shiraishi's crimes left little room for mercy. Presiding Judge Naoko Niano declared the defendant's actions extremely grave, with cunning and cruel methods that cause immeasurable pain to both victims and their families. The dignity of the victims was trampled upon, Judge Yano stated as he delivered the sentence. The pain of their bereaved families is immense. In a final twist, Shiraishi withdrew his appeal against the death sentence in July 2021. His stated reason: he wanted to spare his family further pain and public scrutiny. Whether this represented genuine remorse or merely an acceptance of his fate remains known only to Shiraishi himself. The case's ripple effects extended far beyond the courtroom. Japanese society was forced to confront uncomfortable questions about isolation, mental health, and the darker corners of internet culture. Twitter Japan revised its policies, strengthening prohibitions against content promoting or glorifying suicide. The platform implemented additional resources to connect users expressing suicidal thoughts with mental health services. The case also reignited national discourse on hikikomori, a phenomenon where individuals withdraw completely from society, often spending years isolated in their homes. Many wondered if better support systems might have intercepted both Shiraishi's descent into predatory behavior and his victims' vulnerability to manipulation. Mental health professionals pointed to the case as evidence of Japan's need for more accessible psychological support services. In a society where seeking help for mental health issues still carries significant stigma, many suffer in silence until crisis points are reached. The Shiraishi case demonstrated the potential deadly consequences of this cultural reluctance to address psychological suffering. We need to change how we think about mental health in Japan, stated Dr. Yamada Keiko, a prominent psychiatrist who consulted on the case. The silence around these issues creates spaces where predators like Shiraishi can operate. Each of these 9 victims might be alive today if they had found real support instead of his false promises. In the years following the case, Japan has seen gradual but meaningful changes in how mental health is addressed. Schools have implemented more robust counseling services. Public awareness campaigns have sought to reduce the stigma around seeking professional help. Online platforms have developed more sophisticated monitoring systems to identify potentially dangerous interactions. Perhaps most significantly, families who once might have hidden their loved ones' mental health struggles now speak more openly. Support groups for those who have lost family members to suicide have grown, creating communities of understanding and advocacy for better resources. The story of the Twitter killings extends beyond the horror of 9 lives lost. It serves as a stark reminder of both the fragility of human life and the dangers lurking in online spaces. Those 9 victims sought connection in their darkest moments. Instead, they found a predator who exploited their pain for his own gratification. Their story should compel us all to recognize the value of each human life and the importance of reaching out to those struggling with thoughts of self-harm. The digital world connects us in unprecedented ways, but this connection comes with risks. The screen that brings comfort can also conceal danger. As we navigate our increasingly online lives, the lesson of the Twitter killings reminds us to approach virtual relationships with appropriate caution, especially when we're at our most vulnerable. Behind every username is a real person with real intentions, whether good or ill. In our moments of greatest vulnerability, discernment becomes both most difficult and most essential. The story of Takahiro Shiraishi and his victims is ultimately about the precious nature of human life and how easily it can be extinguished when predators exploit our darkest moments. For those watching who may be struggling with thoughts of suicide or self-harm, remember that legitimate help exists. Unlike Shiraishi's false promises, real support comes without manipulation or hidden agendas. Professional counselors, crisis hotlines, and mental health services exist specifically to help navigate life's most challenging moments. A period of despair need not define your entire existence. Change is always possible. The 9 lives lost in Zama serve as both warning and call to action, a reminder that behind each statistic is a human being whose story deserved a different ending. Their tragedy has forced important conversations about mental health, online safety, and the value of human connection. Perhaps in this way, their lives continue to have meaning by potentially saving others from similar fates. If you've been moved by this story, remember that awareness is our strongest weapon against those who would exploit vulnerability. Join us at Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans for more investigations that expose the darkest corners of criminal minds. Our documentaries dive deep into the psychology of predators, the vulnerabilities they exploit, and the societal factors that allow them to operate. By subscribing to our channel, you become part of a community dedicated to understanding these dark realities, not for sensationalism, but for protection and prevention. Hit that subscribe button now to join our growing audience of critical thinkers and truth seekers. Together, we can shine light into the darkest corners of human behavior and perhaps prevent future tragedies like the one that unfolded in that ordinary apartment in Zama. Remember, in a world where monsters sometimes hide behind screens, knowledge and awareness might be the difference between life and death.